The Young and the Restless spoilers Thurdays full episodes October 30th, 2025. The atmosphere inside the Abbott mansion was tense and strangely electric, the kind of tension that came before a storm that no one could stop. Kane's arrival at the estate was not a social visit, and every step he took across the polished floor carried the weight of urgency. He came not as a friend, but as a man who had seen the edge of disaster. The look in his eyes made it clear that this was not just another corporate rumor or petty rivalry, this was a war that had already begun in the shadows. When he finally reached Jack, his expression said everything that words could not. There was fear in his tone, but also a warning sharpened by betrayal. He had built something powerful, a program that merged artificial intelligence with human decision-making, a system meant to predict markets, guide production, and shape the future of Jabot and beyond. But now that creation had been stolen. What he did not yet know, what Jack was about to realize, was that the theft was not random. The strings led back to Victor Newman, the eternal enemy whose reach stretched beyond morality, beyond law, beyond anything resembling mercy. The realization hit Jack like a slow-burning poison. Jabot was not just a company, it was his family's legacy, the bloodline of generations who had fought to keep it alive through love, loss, and relentless corporate warfare. The thought of losing it not through competition, but through a stolen weapon, felt like a personal desecration. Jack tried to process the gravity of Kane's revelation, but every part of him screamed that this was a setup. Still, Kane's conviction was unshakable. He spoke of how the code had been taken cleanly, surgically, by someone who knew how to cover their tracks. The digital fingerprints were erased, the access logs rewritten, the server integrity compromised beyond simple repair. What remained was the growing certainty that the system was now being re-engineered for destruction. The AI that once promised to make business safer was now capable of tearing Jabot apart from within. Diane, standing quietly nearby, felt her stomach twist as she watched the two men face off. For all her calculated calm, there was something about this that unsettled her. When she asked Kane if he had gone to the authorities, the bitter laugh that followed told her everything. There were no authorities who could protect them from a man like Victor Newman. There was no federal agent or court order strong enough to fight a titan who had long since learned how to weaponize influence. The conversation soon turned darker. Jack's patience began to erode, replaced by the familiar heat of rage. He could not help but think of all the times Victor had outmaneuvered him, manipulated his weaknesses, and poisoned the world around him. He had forgiven enemies before, but Victor was something else entirely, a ghost that kept returning, a rival who fed on chaos. Jack's anger became a promise, not of justice but of retribution. Yet Kane's arrival, though intended as a warning, had only reopened old wounds. To Jack, Kane was part of the problem, a man whose recklessness had created the very weapon that could now destroy them all. When he told Kane that if Jabot went down, he would drag him down with it, it wasn't hyperbole, it was prophecy. Kane, sensing the hostility, reminded him that he was there to help, not to threaten. But no reassurance could bridge the chasm of distrust that separated them. Diane, ever the strategist, tried to redirect the conversation. She reminded Jack that sometimes the enemy wasn't always across the battlefield, it could be someone closer, someone who already knew the terrain. Her mind immediately went to Phyllis Summers. The woman had always danced along the edge of brilliance and madness, capable of extraordinary feats when she wanted something badly enough. Diane suggested that Phyllis could easily have been the one to hack Kane's system, either for her own benefit or as part of some new alliance. The thought lingered like smoke in the air, and neither man could dismiss it. The mere mention of Phyllis changed the mood entirely. Jack felt the familiar ache of betrayal he had buried for years. He didn't want to believe that she would once again be the spark that ignited chaos, but deep down, he knew better. After Kane left the mansion, Jack's mind was a storm of suspicions and impossible decisions. He immediately texted Kyle, summoning his son home from whatever distraction had kept him away. There was no time for explanations, only orders. He then called Billy, demanding his presence at the estate. Billy had always been unpredictable, driven by impulses and resentment, and though Jack trusted him more than most, he knew that Billy's rivalry with Adam Newman had pushed him to the brink. What Jack did not yet realize was that Billy's obsession with outmaneuvering Adam was about to take a dangerous turn that could tear the family apart from within, just as Victor's plans were closing in from the outside. Meanwhile, across town, Phyllis Summers was already one step ahead, or at least she believed she was. Her car rolled up to the Newman ranch under a setting sun that painted the fields gold, a deceptive calm before the collapse. She had what Victor wanted before he even knew he wanted it. The AI program was hers now, stolen, copied, and ready to become her bargaining chip. She was tired of playing small roles in other people's empires. This was her moment to rewrite the rules. When she entered Victor's study, her confidence radiated like fire in a dark room. She showed him the iPad, the interface glowing with Kane's program, lines of code that pulsed like living veins of power. The machine wasn't just software, it was control incarnate. Victor's eyes flickered with something between admiration and suspicion. He was too experienced to trust easily, and he saw through Phyllis's motives as clearly as if she had written them across her face. In his mind, the theft was an opportunity, but also a risk. Victor had seen this kind of ambition before. It was the same hunger that had both built and destroyed countless people in Genoa City. He wondered what Kane had done to drive Phyllis to betrayal, but he didn't ask out of curiosity. He asked because information was the real currency of power, and Phyllis had just revealed that she was desperate enough to sell hers. She spoke with the poise of someone who thought she had the upper hand, but Victor knew better. Every word she said only deepened the trap she was setting for herself. Her offer was simple: she would give him the program, but she wanted a partnership, not charity. She wanted to stand beside Victor Newman, not beneath him. Victor, of course, never saw anyone as an equal. As he listened to her proposition, his mind was already calculating the fallout. If he accepted, he would have the weapon he needed to crush Jabot once and for all, to remind Jack Abbott that some wars never end. But the cost of trusting Phyllis was high. She was a wild card, brilliant but volatile, the kind of woman who could burn down an empire just to feel the heat. Still, her audacity amused him. It reminded him of himself in younger days, when he had clawed his way out of obscurity with nothing but his will. The difference was that Victor had learned to turn fire into discipline. Phyllis was still learning how to keep from being consumed by it. Back at the Abbott mansion, Jack gathered the family for what felt like the beginning of the end. Kyle arrived first, his expression tense and unreadable, followed by Billy, who looked like he had come straight from a fight he hadn't yet finished. The brothers stood under the soft light of the chandelier, while Diane moved quietly in the background, piecing together what she could from fragments of conversation. Jack explained the situation as succinctly as possible. Kane's AI had been stolen, Victor might be behind it, and Jabot was now in grave danger. But as Billy listened, a different fire ignited in him. For months, he had been battling Adam in a psychological war that blurred the line between vengeance and obsession. Now he saw this as the perfect chance to strike first, to dismantle Adam before he could act. Jack's warnings fell on deaf ears. Billy was already thinking 2 steps ahead, but those steps were leading him straight into the dark. In the following hours, the storm that Kane had predicted began to take form. Jack ordered security protocols tightened, servers isolated, and communications rerouted through internal systems. But even as he tried to fortify the company, the feeling of exposure grew stronger. Somewhere out there, someone held the power to erase everything they had built. He could almost feel Victor's presence, like a chess master watching from the shadows, waiting for Jack to make one fatal move. Diane, though outwardly composed, feared something far worse than corporate ruin. She knew Jack's temper, his tendency to let personal vendettas consume him. She worried that this was not just about Jabot anymore, it was about his need to finally beat Victor, no matter the cost. At the ranch, Victor made no promises to Phyllis. He didn't need to. She left believing she had secured his cooperation, unaware that she had only made herself a pawn in a much larger game. For Victor, the AI program was more than a tool, it was leverage. And with leverage came control. As the night deepened, the lights at Newman Ranch burned long into the early hours, reflecting off the glass walls like fire. In the silence of his study, Victor smiled faintly, not out of joy but anticipation. The next chapter of the Newman-Abbott War had already begun, and this time it would not end in a boardroom, it would end in ashes. Jack stood alone in his office at Jabot, staring out at the city that had witnessed every triumph and failure of his life. He felt the weight of decades pressing down on him, the endless battles, the betrayals, the illusions of peace. The irony was cruel. After all this time, it wasn't greed or scandal that threatened to destroy them. It was technology, a human invention designed to make life easier, now turned into an instrument of vengeance. As the night wore on, the first alarms began to sound from the company's network. Unauthorized access detected. Jack's phone vibrated, his screen lighting up with messages he didn't need to read to understand. The attack had begun. And somewhere in the digital smoke, Victor and Phyllis were watching. The Young and the Restless had always been about family, power, and the cost of ambition, but this was something new. This was legacy rewritten in code, loyalty measured in firewalls, betrayal transmitted in silence. Kane's warning had come too late. The lines had already been drawn, the alliances already shifting. And as Genoa City slept under the illusion of peace, its most powerful players prepared for a war that would redefine everything they thought they knew about control, love, and survival. The Grand Phoenix buzzed with its usual energy, but at the Genoa City Athletic Club, the atmosphere was electric with tension of a different kind, one charged by years of rivalry, ambition, and unresolved wounds that had never quite healed. Adam sat across from Billy, his posture deceptively relaxed, though his eyes burned with the sharp edge of accusation. There was a time when these two men could exchange polite words, but that time had long passed. Now, every conversation was a duel, every word a weapon. Adam questioned Billy about the latest gossip circling Genoa City, his removal. Or perhaps his self-removal, from Abbott Communications. To Adam, it was another example of Billy's erratic judgment, his inability to stay satisfied with anything for too long. But Billy didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, his voice steady, even smug, as he explained that he had willingly handed the reins to Sally Spectra, the one person he believed could breathe new life into the company. It wasn't a resignation born from defeat, it was a strategic withdrawal, or at least that's what Billy told himself. Adam's smirk deepened as he listened. To him, Billy's move reeked of self-sabotage. He brought up Sally, the woman who still haunted his thoughts like a ghost he could neither love nor let go. He confessed, perhaps more honestly than he intended, that he worried about her, that she deserved a life untouched by chaos, especially the kind that followed him. The words carried more vulnerability than he wanted to admit, but Billy caught it instantly, twisting it back on him with a cruel kind of amusement. Billy told Adam that if he cared so much, he should learn how to live like a man who wasn't perpetually drowning in his own failures. It wasn't advice, it was mockery, sharpened by years of disdain. Adam's jaw tightened. The mention of Sally was a wound that hadn't healed, and Billy knew exactly where to press. Their conversation spiraled quickly, as it always did. Adam shifted the topic to Jill Abbott, the matriarch who had built her empire with intelligence and ferocity. He pointed out that even Jill seemed to place more faith in her adopted son than in her own blood. The jab landed hard. Billy's hands clenched at his sides, his entire body rigid with anger. He demanded Adam never mention his mother again, his voice low but vibrating with fury. Adam, of course, ignored the warning. He had never been one to stop once he sensed weakness. He reminded Billy of his endless need to escape Jack's shadow, of how every achievement he ever had was measured against the one brother he could never outshine. The implication was cruel but true. Billy would always be the other Abbott, the reckless one, the one who couldn't be trusted to lead without destroying something along the way. When Adam told him to leave town, to spare everyone from the stench of his own failures, the insult hit its mark with devastating precision. Billy didn't think, he reacted. His fist connected with Adam's mouth in a blur of motion that silenced the entire room for a heartbeat. Adam stumbled backward, the copper taste of blood filling his mouth as he fell hard against the polished floor. The impact echoed through the club, and before anyone could intervene, Chelsea Lawson appeared, drawn by the noise and the chaos that seemed to follow these men wherever they went. She rushed toward Adam instinctively, but her fury was directed at Billy. Her words sliced through the air, each one dripping with disappointment and disgust. She had seen this cycle too many times before, the toxic blend of ego and pride that turned every conversation between Adam and Billy into a powder keg. Billy didn't argue. His expression was unreadable, a mask of anger barely hiding something deeper, shame, perhaps, or the realization that he had just proven Adam right. Without another word, he stormed out, leaving a trail of unresolved tension in his wake. The door closed behind him, but the silence he left behind was heavy and suffocating. Adam sat on the floor for a moment, the sting of the punch fading beneath the sharper ache of humiliation. He wiped the blood from his lip, looking up at Chelsea with a mix of defiance and vulnerability. There was a flicker of something human in his eyes, something that neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Chelsea helped him to his feet, her hands gentle despite the storm of emotions swirling around them. She guided him to a nearby chair and began dabbing at the cut on his mouth with a napkin. For a moment, the world outside the two of them seemed to fade, the noise of the club, the whispers, the judgment. Adam stared at her, his voice quieter than it had been in years. He admitted, almost to himself, that he probably deserved what Billy had given him. It wasn't the punch that hurt, but the truth embedded within their argument. Billy had struck a nerve, the same one Adam had been trying to numb for years with work, power, and self-destruction. He had always pushed people away, only to resent them for leaving. Chelsea didn't respond right away. She knew Adam too well to offer hollow comfort. Instead, she focused on cleaning the wound, her movements precise, almost ritualistic. When Adam finally broke the silence again, it was with a faint, ironic smile. He told her he'd never admit it to Billy, but part of him had wanted that fight. It was easier to feel pain from a punch than from guilt. At least physical pain had boundaries, it could heal. Emotional pain lingered like smoke in his lungs. He confessed that every time he tried to make peace with the past, someone like Billy came along to remind him of everything he'd destroyed. Chelsea looked at him, torn between empathy and exasperation. She had seen this version of Adam before, the self-aware cynic who could dissect his own flaws but never fix them. There was still something magnetic about him, something that made her care against her better judgment. But before she could say anything, Adam's phone buzzed. The sound broke the fragile moment between them. He glanced at the screen, and his face hardened instantly. It was a message from Victor, summoning him to the ranch. No explanation, no preamble, just the kind of command that could not be ignored.